Emeka was a kind and hard-working man who lived peacefully with his young daughter, Adaeze. Adaeze was a bright and cheerful girl who adored her father and shared a special bond with her mother. But their happiness was shattered when Adaeze's mother suddenly passed away. The loss was devastating for both father and daughter, leaving a deep emptiness in their lives. Hoping to bring joy and stability back to their home, Emeka decided to marry again. He believed Adaeze needed a mother to guide and love her, so he chose Nkem, a woman who seemed gentle, loving, and perfect. Nkem presented herself as a kind and caring woman, and Emeka was convinced she was the right person to help heal his family. At first, Nkem appeared to be a good stepmother. She smiled warmly at Adaeze and pretended to care for her in front of Emeka, but behind Emeka's back, Nkem's true nature began to surface. She was envious of Adaeze's sweet personality and the love Emeka had for his daughter. Secretly, she despised the little girl and started plotting ways to make her life miserable. Unaware of Nkem's hidden cruelty, Emeka believed his family was finally healing. But for Adaeze, this marked the beginning of a difficult and painful journey, filled with challenges that would test her strength, resilience, and faith. Adaeze was a kind and intelligent young girl who had always been her parents' pride and joy. She loved her mother deeply, and the two shared a bond that was unbreakable. Her mother would tell her stories at bedtime, help her with her schoolwork, and comfort her when she was sad. But everything changed the day her mother passed away. The house that was once filled with love and laughter now felt cold and empty. Adaeze struggled to understand why her mother was gone and why life felt so unfair. She tried to stay strong for her father, Emeka, but deep inside, she felt lost and lonely. When Nkem came into their lives, Adaeze thought things might get better. At first, Nkem seemed kind. She would smile at Adaeze, pat her on the head, and even call her my daughter in front of Emeka. Adaeze wanted to believe that Nkem could be like a new mother to her. But soon, Adaeze noticed something strange. When her father wasn't around, Nkem's smile would disappear and her voice would become cold. She would ignore Adaeze or give her sharp looks that made her feel unwelcome. Adaeze didn't understand why Nkem seemed to dislike her. She tried her best to please her stepmother by being polite and helpful. But no matter what Adaeze did, Nkem's hatred for her grew. Nkem was jealous of the love Emeka had for his daughter and saw Adaeze as an obstacle. To Emeka, Nkem acted like a loving stepmother, but behind his back, she secretly despised Adaeze. This marked the beginning of a very difficult time for Adaeze, as her once happy childhood turned into a painful and lonely struggle. At first, Adaeze thought she just needed time to get used to her stepmother, but soon, small signs of cruelty began to appear. One evening, Adaeze was hungry after a long day at school. She went to the kitchen to get some food, but Nkem stopped her. "You can eat after you finish cleaning the whole house," Nkem said coldly. Adaeze looked at her, confused, cleaning the entire house. That was not something her mother had ever made her do. But Adaeze didn't want to upset her stepmother, so she quietly obeyed. She scrubbed the floors, washed the dishes, and dusted every corner of the house while her stomach growled with hunger. When she finally finished and asked for food, Nkem smirked and said, "There's nothing left. You should have worked faster." Adaze's heart sank, but she didn't argue. She went to bed hungry that night, wondering what she had done to deserve such treatment. This became a daily routine. Nkem started giving Adaeze all the housework, cleaning, cooking, washing clothes, while treating her coldly. If Adaeze made a small mistake, like missing a spot while sweeping, Nkem would scold her harshly or refuse to let her eat. Whenever Emeka was home, Nkem would act sweet and caring, serving Adaeze food and speaking kindly to her. Emeka had no idea what was happening behind his back because Nkem was so good at pretending. Adaeze didn't want to trouble her father, so she kept quiet about her stepmother's behavior. She thought maybe if she worked harder, Nkem would start to like her, but no matter how hard she tried, Nkem always found a way to make her feel small and unimportant. Adaeze started to miss her mother even more, wishing she was still there to protect her. The house that had once been her safe haven now felt like a place of endless chores and silent tears. One afternoon, while Adaeze was cleaning the living room as Nkem had ordered, She paused to touch the small silver locket around her neck. It was the only thing she had left of her mother, a gift her mother had given her before she passed away. Inside the locket was a tiny picture of her mother and Adaise together, smiling. Whenever Adaise felt sad or missed her mother, she would hold the locket and feel a little closer to her. It gave her comfort, like her mother was still watching over her. Nkem noticed Adaise holding the locket and frowned. She hated seeing Adaise cherish anything that reminded her of her mother. To Nkem, the locket was a symbol of everything she wanted to erase: Adaise's bond with her mother and the love Emeka still had for his late wife. That evening, when Adaise was busy in the kitchen, Nkem quietly took the locket from Adaise's room. Later, when Adaise couldn't find her locket, she panicked. She searched everywhere, tears streaming down her face. "Stepmother, have you seen my locket?" she asked desperately. Nkem smirked and pulled it out from her pocket. "This old thing," she said coldly. "It's useless." Before Adaise could react, Nkem threw the locket into the fire burning in the kitchen. "No!" Adaise screamed, rushing toward the fire, but it was too late. The flames swallowed the locket, leaving only ashes. Adaise fell to the floor, crying uncontrollably. That locket had been her last connection to her mother, and now it was gone. Nkem stood over her with a cruel smile. "It's time to stop clinging to the past," she said. From that day, something changed in Adaise. She became quieter, often staring off into space or mumbling to herself. She started having trouble sleeping at night, haunted by nightmares of the fire and her stepmother's cruel face. Her once bright eyes looked dull, and she no longer smiled like she used to. Nkem noticed the change and felt satisfied, thinking she had broken Adaise's spirit. Emeka, however, began to notice that something was wrong. His cheerful little girl seemed to be slipping away, but every time he asked Nkem about it, she would sigh and say, "Adaise is just being difficult. She doesn't want to adjust." Emeka believed her, not knowing the full truth of what was happening in his own home. Adaise loved going to school. It was the only place where she could escape the cruelty at home and feel like herself. She enjoyed learning, playing with her friends, and dreaming of a brighter future. But one morning, as she was getting ready for school, Nkem stopped her. "You're not going to school anymore," she said firmly. Adaise froze in shock. "But why? I haven't done anything wrong," she said, her voice trembling. "You're wasting time there," Nkem replied coldly. "There's too much work to do at home. From now on, you'll stay here and help me." Adaise tried to argue, but Nkem's glare silenced her. Adaise watched helplessly as her stepmother took away her school bag and books. The next day, she could hear the laughter of children passing by the house on their way to school. It hurt her deeply to know she wasn't with them. As days turned into weeks, Adaise's world became smaller and smaller. She wasn't allowed to see her friends or leave the house. From morning till night, she worked tirelessly, doing all the chores while Nkem relaxed. The isolation made Adaise feel even more lonely. She missed her friends and the joy she felt in the classroom. She longed to tell someone about her pain, but there was no one to listen. Slowly, the loneliness began to weigh on her mind. With no one to talk to, Adaise started talking to herself. Sometimes she would whisper as if she were speaking to her mother, imagining her mother could hear her. Other times, she would sit in a corner, hugging herself and mumbling about how unfair life was. Her once bright mind seemed to be fading, and her smiles were completely gone. Nkem noticed Adaise's strange behavior, but didn't care. In fact, it pleased her to see the girl becoming weaker and more withdrawn. She thought Adaise would soon be too broken to fight back. Meanwhile, Emeka was busy with work and barely noticed how much his daughter had changed. Whenever he asked Nkem about Adaise, she would sigh and say, "She's just upset about staying home. But it's for her own good." Emeka trusted his wife and didn't realize the deep pain Adaise was hiding inside. One evening, as Nkem sat alone in the living room, something unusual happened. The family dog, Bruno, who was usually calm and friendly, began barking at her. His growls were low and menacing, and his sharp eyes stayed fixed on Nkem. She waved her hand to shoo him away, but instead of obeying, Bruno backed away from her, still growling. "Stupid dog!" Nkem hissed, but she felt uneasy. Bruno had never behaved like this before. He refused to stay near her and ran out of the house, hiding in the yard. Nkem tried to brush it off, but as the days passed, more strange things began to happen. One night, as she was combing her hair in front of her bedroom mirror, she heard a faint cracking sound. Before she could react, the mirror suddenly cracked in the middle, as if struck by an invisible force. Nkem gasped and stepped back, her heart racing. There was no one else in the room, and she hadn't touched the mirror. She stared at her reflection through the broken glass, feeling a chill run down her spine. The house itself seemed to turn against her. The once warm air felt cold, and she often felt as if unseen eyes were watching her. Lights flickered without reason, and shadows seemed to dance on the walls, even when no one was there. At night, strange whispers filled the silence, making it hard for Nkem to sleep. Though she tried to stay calm, fear began to creep into her heart. At first, Nkem told herself it was all in her head, but the strange events kept happening. Even Bruno, who once happily stayed inside the house, now refused to come near her. Every time Nkem approached him, he would growl and run away, leaving her feeling abandoned and exposed. Deep down, Nkem began to wonder if something greater was at work. These events weren't normal, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were connected to her treatment of Adaise. But instead of changing her ways, Nkem grew more stubborn. She convinced herself that nothing could harm her and ignored the signs, unaware that these were just the first warnings of what was to come. One afternoon, Nkem grew furious when Adaise accidentally spilled a cup of water while cleaning. Her hands had been trembling from exhaustion, but Nkem saw it as an act of defiance. "You're clumsy and useless!" Nkem yelled, her voice sharp and angry. Adaise tried to apologize, her voice shaking with fear, but Nkem wasn't interested in listening. In her rage, Nkem grabbed Adaise by the arm and dragged her to the small, dark storeroom at the back of the house. "You'll stay here until you learn how to behave," Nkem said coldly, locking the door behind her. The room was damp and cold, with no light and no place to sit except the dirty floor. Adaise cried and banged on the door, begging to be let out, but Nkem ignored her. She left Adaise there for hours, refusing to give her food or water. The hours turned into days, and the little girl grew weaker, her cries fading into silence. Emeka noticed that something was wrong. When he came home from work, he asked, "Where is Adaise? I haven't seen her all day." Nkem, with her usual fake smile, replied, "Oh, she's been behaving badly. She refused to listen, so I told her to stay in her room to think about her actions. You know how difficult children can be." Emeka frowned but trusted his wife, believing she was handling the situation as a responsible stepmother. By the time Nkem finally let Adaise out of the storeroom, the little girl was pale and weak. She could barely stand, and her once bright eyes looked hollow. Nkem scolded her again, saying, "This is what happens when you don't follow my rules." Adaise didn't respond. She was too tired, too broken. She shuffled off to her room, clutching her empty stomach, and lay on her bed, tears rolling down her face. Emeka began noticing changes in his daughter. She no longer ran to greet him when he came home, and her voice was quieter, almost like a whisper. She seemed to avoid looking him in the eyes, and her once lively spirit was gone. "Is Adaise all right?" he asked Nkem one evening. "She seems different." Nkem sighed and put on a concerned expression. "She's just moody. You know how children can be. She's still adjusting to having me here. It's not easy for her, but she'll be fine." Emeka nodded, wanting to believe her, but a small part of him couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Meanwhile, Adaise sat alone in her room, feeling more isolated and helpless than ever. The days of pain and loneliness finally took their toll on Adaise. Each passing moment in Nkem's house felt like a heavy weight on her heart. She no longer had the energy to cry, and her mind felt like it was breaking into pieces. Nkem's cruelty, the isolation, and the loss of her mother had left her feeling completely alone in the world. One evening, after finishing her chores, Adaise quietly slipped out of the house. She didn't know where she was going. She just wanted to escape the misery. Her feet carried her down the dusty village road as her thoughts swirled in her mind. Her lips moved as she spoke softly to herself. as if having a conversation with someone who wasn't there. "Mama, are you here? Can you hear me? I miss you so much," she murmured. She spoke about the locket, the days locked in the dark room, and how she wished everything would just end. The villagers passing by stopped to watch her. Her clothes were dirty, her hair was unkempt, and her once bright eyes were clouded with confusion. "Is that not Emeka's daughter?" one of the women whispered. "What is she doing out here? And why is she talking to herself like that?" Adese kept wandering aimlessly, her bare feet aching from the rough ground. She didn't notice the people staring or hear their murmurs. Her mind was trapped in its own world, far from reality. "Mama, are you angry with me? Is that why you left?" she asked the empty air, her voice trembling. Eventually, one of the neighbors recognized her and rushed to stop her. "Adese! What are you doing out here, child? Are you all right?" the woman asked, gently grabbing her shoulders. Adese looked at her blankly, as if she didn't recognize her, and continued mumbling. "I'm sorry, Mama. I'll be good. I promise. Please come back." The neighbor, alarmed by Adese's condition, quickly took her to her home and gave her food and water. "This poor child," she said, shaking her head. "Something is terribly wrong. I need to tell her father." She sent for Emeka, who arrived quickly, worried and confused. When Emeka saw Adese sitting in the corner mumbling to herself, his heart broke. "What happened to my daughter?" he demanded, his voice filled with panic. But even then, Nkem managed to twist the situation, saying, "I've been trying to help her, but she's been acting strange. She doesn't listen, and she keeps blaming me for things I didn't do. I think she's just troubled by the loss of her mother." Though Emeka wanted to believe in Nkem, a part of him began to question her words. He looked at Adese, his once cheerful daughter now a shadow of herself, and felt a deep pain in his chest. Something was very wrong, and he knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. Nkem felt a twisted sense of triumph as she watched Adese fall apart. In her mind, she had won. Adese's spirit was broken, and now the girl was no longer a threat to her control over the household. After Adese's strange behavior in the streets, Nkem saw an opportunity to get rid of her once and for all. She pretended to be concerned, telling Emeka that Adese needed a change of environment to heal. "Emeka," Nkem said one evening, her voice soft and full of fake worry. "I think Adese needs help. Staying here isn't good for her anymore. She needs time to recover, and maybe some distance will help her." Emeka, already shaken by what had happened, listened carefully. "But where would she go?" he asked, troubled. "She needs her family, Nkem. She's all I have left of my late wife." Nkem put her hand on his and gave him a sympathetic look. "I understand, but sometimes love means letting go. What if we send her to your cousin's home in the other village? They'll take good care of her, and she can start fresh there. I'm only suggesting this because I care about her." Her words were like poison wrapped in honey, and Emeka, blinded by her act, reluctantly agreed. The next morning, Nkem packed Adese's few belongings into a small bag. She didn't bother to ask Adese how she felt about leaving. When she told Adese she was being sent away, the girl simply nodded, too tired and broken to argue. Nkem smirked to herself, feeling victorious. She believed that once Adese was gone, she would finally have full control of the house and Emeka's attention. When Emeka said goodbye to his daughter, he felt a pang of guilt. "It's only for a little while," he told her, trying to reassure himself more than her. Adese didn't cry or protest. She simply lowered her head and whispered, "Yes, Papa." Her voice was so soft, it was almost inaudible. Emeka hugged her tightly, feeling an ache in his heart, but convincing himself that this was for her own good. As the cart carrying Adese disappeared down the road, Nkem stood at the doorway, smiling to herself. She believed she had finally succeeded in erasing Adese from her life. "Good riddance," she muttered under her breath, feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction. But what Nkem didn't know was that this false victory would be the beginning of her downfall. At first, everything seemed calm after Adese was sent away. Nkem took control of the house again, believing she had won. But soon, strange things began to happen. Every night, when Nkem was trying to sleep, she would hear a faint voice calling her name. "Nkem, Nkem." It was a soft whisper, but it sounded so real. She would sit up in bed, heart racing, but there was no one there. At first, she told herself it was just her imagination, but the voice came every night, growing louder until she couldn't ignore it any longer. One evening, as Nkem was cleaning the kitchen, she heard the voice again. "Nkem, why did you do this?" it asked, echoing through the house. Nkem froze, her blood running cold. She quickly glanced around, but the house was empty. It felt as if the walls themselves were whispering to her. "Who's there?" she demanded, but no answer came. Over the next few days, more strange things happened. Nkem felt an uneasy chill in the air, and things in the house started to break for no reason. The plates would shatter without anyone touching them, and her favorite vase fell off the shelf despite no one being near it. Her reflection in the mirror seemed to change, as if someone else was standing behind her, though she was alone. The strange happenings unsettled her, and she began to feel that something was wrong, but she couldn't understand what it was. As if that wasn't enough, Nkem began to feel ill. It started with a headache that wouldn't go away, and soon she was feeling weak and dizzy all the time. Her stomach ached, and her energy disappeared. She went to the doctor, but there was no explanation for her sudden illness. "You're just stressed," the doctor said. "Take it easy for a while." But no matter how much she rested, Nkem didn't get better. Around the same time, the money she had been managing for the household started to disappear. Bills piled up, and there was never enough to pay for everything. Emeka's business began to suffer too. Clients stopped coming, and his work was not as successful as it used to be. Every time Nkem looked at the bank account, it seemed to shrink, and she couldn't figure out why. As Nkem's health worsened and the money problems grew, she began to wonder if these strange events were connected. Could they have something to do with Adai's? She hadn't treated the girl well, and now it seemed like something beyond her control, was turning against her. Nkem's thoughts became filled with fear. Deep down, she started to feel that she had done something unforgivable, and now she was being punished. After Adai's was sent away, she felt lost and alone. The journey to her relative's house was long, and when she arrived, she found a small, humble home. But there was something different about this place. The elderly woman who lived there, Aunt Ngozi, welcomed Adaize with open arms. "Don't worry, my dear," she said kindly. "You're safe here now." Adaize was too tired and broken to speak, but she felt a small spark of hope in her heart. Maybe this place could be different. Aunt Ngozi took care of Adaize with love and patience. She gave her nourishing food and a warm bed, something Adaize hadn't had in a long time. At first, Adaize felt weak, both physically and emotionally. The memories of her painful life with Nkem haunted her, and it was hard to sleep without waking up in fear. But Aunt Ngozi never judged her. Instead, she comforted Adaize, telling her stories of faith, love, and strength. Over time, Adaize began to heal. The pain in her body started to fade, and her mind became clearer. Every morning, Aunt Ngozi would take Adaize to the small church in the village. The soft sound of the church bell ringing in the distance became a comfort to Adaize. At first, she didn't know how to pray, but Aunt Ngozi gently showed her how. As Adaize knelt in the quiet church, she whispered her fears and hopes to God. She prayed for strength, for healing, and for the courage to forgive those who had hurt her. Slowly, she began to feel a sense of peace wash over her. Her spirit, once broken, began to rebuild itself piece by piece. The kind words and prayers filled her with light. She wasn't alone anymore. She had found strength in her faith. Days turned into weeks, and Adaize grew stronger, both inside and out. Her smile, which had once been lost, returned. She started to laugh again, and her eyes began to sparkle with hope. Aunt Ngozi saw the change in her and encouraged Adaize to continue growing in her faith. "You are strong, my dear," she would say. "You have come so far. Remember, God never leaves us, even in our darkest moments." Adaize didn't forget her past, but she was no longer weighed down by it. She had found a new purpose, a new beginning. As she spent more time in prayer and reflection, Adaize began to understand that the pain she had experienced had shaped her into a strong young woman. And with that strength, she would face whatever came next with courage and grace. One afternoon, as Emeka was walking through the village, he ran into a neighbor, Mrs. Nwabudike. who had always been friendly to him. She seemed a bit uneasy, as if she wanted to say something important, but wasn't sure how. After a few moments of silence, she finally spoke, her voice low. Emeka, there's something you should know about your daughter Adaeze. Emeka felt a twist in his stomach. What do you mean? He asked, his heart racing. Mrs. Nwabudike looked around, as if checking to make sure no one was listening. It's about how she was treated at home, by Nkem. Her words shocked Emeka, and his face turned pale. I've seen the way she looks, so sad and broken, and I've heard the whispers from others. Adaeze was never treated kindly. Emeka's mind spun as he listened, disbelief mixing with growing concern. What are you saying? He asked, his voice trembling. She was locked away in a dark room, Emeka, left hungry and alone. I saw it with my own eyes. The child was not given food, and she was punished for no reason. I know it's hard to believe, but I couldn't keep quiet any longer. Emeka was speechless. He had always trusted Nkem, and never imagined she could be capable of such cruelty. He thought of the strange behavior he had seen in Adaeze, how quiet and withdrawn she had become. But he had never connected it to Nkem's treatment. Now, as he looked back, the signs seemed so clear. His heart ached with guilt as he thought of the daughter he had failed to protect. Without saying another word, Emeka hurried home. His mind was racing, and his hands trembled as he opened the door. Nkem was sitting in the living room, looking calm and collected as usual. She smiled at him. Emeka, you're home early today. He stood still for a moment, taking a deep breath before confronting her. Nkem, I need to know the truth. Did you hurt Adaeze? Nkem's smile faltered, but only for a second. What are you talking about? She asked, pretending to be confused. Of course I didn't hurt her. Adaeze is just a difficult child, always acting out. She made everything hard for me, and I was only trying to teach her discipline. I'm sure she's lying about everything. Emeka's heart sank as Nkem's words hit him like a punch. He had never seen her this defensive before, and her tone was cold, almost angry. Don't you dare try to make it sound like it's Adaeze's fault, Emeka said, his voice shaking with emotion. I've heard everything, Nkem. I know what you did, and I can't let it go any longer. Nkem's face went pale, but she quickly recovered, putting on her usual act. Emeka, you've been listening to gossip. Adaeze is just trying to cause trouble. You know how children lie, especially when they don't get their way. She tried to stand up, but Emeka stepped forward, his anger growing. No, Nkem, this isn't a lie. I've seen the truth, and I won't let you get away with it, he said, his voice filled with pain and anger. For the first time, Emeka realized that the woman he had trusted with his family had betrayed him in the worst way. He felt the weight of his mistake press down on him, and he knew things would never be the same again. After Emeka confronted Nkem, everything in her life began to fall apart. At first, it was small things. Her health started to deteriorate. She had trouble sleeping, and her once strong body grew weak and frail. Simple tasks that she used to do without thinking became difficult for her. She had headaches every day, and no matter what the doctors did, nothing seemed to help. Her beauty, once admired by everyone, faded. Her skin lost its glow. Her hair became dull and lifeless, and the sparkle in her eyes disappeared. She barely recognized herself in the mirror anymore. As her health worsened, her reputation in the village also began to crumble. People who had once smiled at her on the street now turned their backs. The whispers started. At first they were quiet, but as more people began to notice her misfortune, they grew louder. She's cursed, some villagers said. She must have done something terrible for her life to fall apart like this. Others spoke of her cruelty toward Adaeze, the poor girl who had been sent away. The whole village seemed to know what had really happened, and no one wanted to be near her. Emeka also began to distance himself from her. He had tried to ignore the signs before, but now, seeing her suffering, he couldn't pretend any longer. He felt guilty for not protecting Adaeze, and his love for Nkem began to fade. He spent more time away from home, visiting friends or working in the fields. He could no longer look at Nkem without remembering what she had done to his daughter. The distance between them grew wider with each passing day. Nkem became bitter and angry, but her bitterness only pushed Emeka further away. He had lost trust in her, and he no longer knew how to face her. The community too had turned against her, and soon she was alone. Her life, once filled with power and control, now seemed empty. People no longer greeted her in the market, and even her old friends stopped coming to visit. As Nkem's world crumbled, she realized too late that the cruelty she had shown Adaeze had come back to her in a way she never expected. She had once thought she could control everything, but now she was the one who had lost it all. She had hurt an innocent child, and in the end, it was her own life that had been shattered. God's justice had come in a way she couldn't escape, and Nkem was left to face the consequences of her actions, alone and broken. Years had passed since Adaeze was sent away, and during that time, she had grown into a strong, confident young woman. The girl who once wandered the streets, lost and broken, was now filled with purpose and peace. Her time with Aunt Ngozi had healed her both physically and emotionally. Adaeze had found a new sense of self through her faith, and she had become someone who was no longer defined by her past pain. One day, Adaeze decided it was time to return to her village. She had heard whispers of what had happened to Nkem, and though she had every reason to feel anger, Adaeze felt something different, compassion. She understood now that forgiveness was the only way to truly move forward. She had spent years healing, and she knew it was time to show mercy to the woman who had once tormented her. As she walked through the familiar paths of the village, people stared in awe. The young girl who had once been a shadow of herself had come back, but now she was full of life and grace. Adaeze's strength was evident in the way she carried herself, and the villagers couldn't help but admire her. When she reached her old home, she saw Nkem sitting in front of the house, her eyes tired and her face worn with age. The woman who had once been so full of pride and cruelty now looked small and defeated. For a moment, Adaeze hesitated. She remembered the pain, the suffering, and the way Nkem had hurt her. But then, she remembered the peace she had found through forgiveness and prayer. Adaeze took a deep breath and approached Nkem. Nkem looked up in surprise, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Adaeze," she whispered, her voice trembling. She hadn't expected the girl to come back, let alone stand before her with such calmness. "Yes, Nkem," Adaeze replied, her voice steady. "I've come to forgive you." Nkem's face twisted with confusion and fear. "Forgive me, after everything I did to you?" she asked, her voice filled with shame. Adaeze nodded. "I understand now. You were broken in your own way. I used to carry anger in my heart, but I've learned that holding on to hate only keeps you in chains. I am free now, and I want you to be free too." Nkem sat in silence, her eyes filled with tears. She had never expected Adaeze to be so kind, so strong, after everything she had put her through. Slowly, she reached out, her hands shaking. "I'm so sorry, Adaeze," she whispered, her voice filled with regret. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." Adaeze smiled gently, the forgiveness in her heart shining through. "We all make mistakes, Nkem. What matters is that we learn from them. I have forgiven you, and I hope you can forgive yourself too." With those words, Adaeze turned and left. She didn't need to stay any longer. She had come to offer forgiveness, and now she could walk away, knowing she had done what was right. Nkem, sitting alone in the dust, felt the weight of her years of cruelty lift ever so slightly. She realized, in that moment, that Adaeze's strength had given her a glimpse of hope, even if she didn't know how to find peace for herself just yet. Adaeze's return wasn't just a physical one. It was a symbol of her growth, her healing, and the incredible strength she had found in forgiveness. In the days that followed Adaeze's return, Nkem's life seemed to crumble further. The people in the village continued to avoid her, and the whispers about her cruelty never stopped. She spent her days in the quiet of her home, staring out the window at a world that no longer cared for her. The woman who had once been so proud and full of control now felt like a shadow of her former self. Her health continued to worsen, and the bitterness in her heart grew. But despite her pain, she couldn't escape the one truth that haunted her, the kindness Adaeze had shown her. Nkem often found herself thinking about that moment when Adaeze had forgiven her. She couldn't understand it, How could a girl who had been so mistreated show such grace and compassion? It was a lesson Nkem hadn't learned in her life, and it hurt her to know that Adaeze had something she didn't: peace. While Nkem struggled to make sense of everything, Adaeze had found a place of true peace in her heart. She had forgiven Nkem, not because it was easy, but because she understood that carrying hatred would only hurt her. Adaeze's life was no longer defined by the pain Nkem had caused her. Instead, it was defined by the strength she had found in herself, in her faith, and in her ability to forgive. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a soft orange, Adaeze sat quietly in the small church in the village. She closed her eyes and prayed, not just for herself, but for Nkem as well. "Please, God," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with sincerity. "Help Nkem find the peace she needs. Help her see the way to forgiveness, just as I have." Adaeze's prayer wasn't out of pity, it was out of love. She had learned that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or excusing the wrongs done to you. It meant freeing yourself from the chains of anger and pain. By forgiving Nkem, Adaeze had set herself free. Now, she prayed that Nkem could find the same freedom, the same peace. The story of Adaeze and Nkem was a lesson for everyone about the power of forgiveness, the strength it takes to let go of hate, and the healing that comes from showing kindness, even to those who don't deserve it. Adaeze had shown that forgiveness wasn't a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength. It was a choice that could heal old wounds and open the door to new beginnings. And so, while Nkem remained alone in her pain, Adaeze's heart remained full of compassion. She knew that true victory wasn't in revenge or anger, it was in forgiveness. And with that, Adaeze had won the greatest victory of all. If you found this story meaningful and inspiring, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will touch your heart and remind you of the power of forgiveness. Share your thoughts in the comments below. How has this story impacted you, and what lesson will you carry with you? We'd love to hear from you.